Why do we feel like we are our thoughts? Why does it seem like our mind is the core of who we are, our real being, even though it is so often out of control? The Buddha gave us a striking simile for this condition. He said that the mind is like a monkey swinging through the forest. He also had something else to say in that sutta which is even more surprising. We'll get to that at the end. In this video, I'll explore this simile of the monkey mind, some other, as I say, surprising things the Buddha had to say about the nature of the mind, and how we can work with this monkey mind in our daily practice. First, let's turn to this monkey mind and the idea of misplaced identity. How is it that the ordinary person relates to the body and the mind? The Buddha has this to say in one early sutta. Mendicants, when it comes to this body made up of the four elements, an unlearned ordinary person might become disillusioned, dispassionate, and freed. Why is that? This body is made up of the four elements, is seen to accumulate and disperse, to be taken up and laid to rest. That's why when it comes to this body, an unlearned ordinary person might become disillusioned, dispassionate, and freed. But when it comes to that which is called mind, and also sentience and also consciousness, an unlearned ordinary person is unable to become disillusioned, dispassionate, or freed. Why is that? Because for a long time they've been attached to it, thought of it as their own and mistaken it. This is mine. I am this. This is myself. That is, many of us ordinary people understand that the body grows and shrinks as we age, we grow up, we start life as a little baby and grow up and become an adult and then go into old age, that the body changes shape, it changes form, we get wrinkles, we get different sorts of age spots and so on, and eventually the body dies and decays. And so therefore it is naive and unskillful to take the body as who we really are, because it's always in a state of change. Most of us do understand that the body therefore isn't permanent. However, the mind, or at least some conception that we have of the mind, such as sentience or thought or consciousness, we don't think of in that way. And so even relatively sophisticated and ordinary people may take the mind or some conception of the mind as who we really are. Having made this claim that most ordinary folks are attached to the mind as who we really are, the Buddha then goes on to make his famous simile. He says, "But that which is called mind and also sentience and also consciousness is like a monkey moving through the forest. It grabs hold of one branch, lets it go, and grabs another. Then it lets that go and grabs yet another. In the same way, that which is called mind and also sentience and also consciousness arises as one thing and ceases as another all day and all night." Now, this simile of the Buddha's has a number of key connotations. Perhaps the most important of these is that the mind, or consciousness, or wherever we're going to understand it, arises and ceases depending on a particular object. This is a point that the Buddha makes in many different places in the suttas. So we could perhaps come up with an example. Let's say we're out late at night on the street and we see some guy being manhandled in a doorway. And then later on, someone tells us that this man we have seen being manhandled was a violent drunk who had started a fight in the bar nearby. So what has happened in our mind during this whole process? Well, to begin with, we have eye consciousness. We see a certain thing based on a particular visual object in front of us. It's a man being manhandled. This causes to arise in us certain kinds of mental states, say anger, a wish to intercede, maybe thoughts of call the police or something, this person's being manhandled, what are they doing to him? And then later on, that eye consciousness is replaced by ear consciousness when somebody talks to us about what's been going on. And then our mind changes. Instead of feeling anger about what's going on, we our anger dissipates and disappears completely. It's replaced perhaps by a feeling of relief that something's been done. This person perhaps has been stopped from creating more harm in the world. The point here is that, as the Buddha says, that which is called mind arises as one thing and ceases as another all day and all night. The mind is always in a process of change, often radical change, and so therefore it's not a stable source for a sense of permanent self. The Buddha also had something else, in a sense even more surprising to say in the remainder of this sutta, which I'll get to in a moment. Second, I want to turn to this idea of the wandering mind. Another connotation of this simile that the Buddha gives us of the monkey mind isn't explicitly made in this sutta, I think, but is nevertheless understood by much of the tradition, which is that the mind, in being like a monkey, is, in a sense, random. It moves randomly from place to place, unguidedly from place to place. And this is a very good simile for the experience we all have of restlessness, in particular restlessness when we're in meditation. Restlessness is one of the most common, perhaps deepest, of the hindrances to meditation. That is, this monkey mind that we're talking about, it isn't mean or evil in any way, it's just directionless and out of control. It's confused. So it's pulled this way and that by certain kinds of things that it desires or that it wants to be away from, sense desires and other kinds of sense objects that pull it one way or another. Recognizing this restlessness, and that the restlessness is caused by our cravings and aversions, is the first step towards taming this monkey mind. Third, I want to get to how we tame this monkey mind. In the suttas, the Buddha gives a number of different techniques we can use for stabilizing and calming the monkey mind. Now, we can't get into them all here, but I can touch on at least a few of them. First of all, we can use what's known as sense restraint, which is to be aware of the way that our senses are interacting in the world and what sorts of media, let's say, we're consuming. And to try to understand whether that media, whether those sense objects that we're consuming, that we're getting involved with, are beneficial or not for us, for our minds. Do they help to stabilize and calm the mind? Do they help to put us in a good frame of mind? Or instead, do they tend to condition more monkey-mindedness? If we feel we're being overwhelmed by a particular kind of sense object, by a particular sort of media, then perhaps we practice sense restraint with regard to that. We stop consuming it quite so much. Second, we can practice concentration meditation. Here is where, in formal meditation, we sit down and do a practice of focusing our attention on one particular object, such as, let's say, the breath, or perhaps a mantra, or many other different things. We focus on it in order to, again, calm and stabilize the mind onto one particular object. And perhaps over time, through this kind of process of stabilization, we can reach deeper states of meditative absorption. Third, we can use a practice of mindfulness, where we turn our attention to present moment experience instead of allowing the mind to wander willy-nilly to the past and the future and to other places and times. And mindfulness meditation, in the Buddha's description of the practice of mindfulness meditation in the suttas, and in particular in his 4 foundations of mindfulness, he begins this practice with a focus on mindfulness of the body. Now, why does he begin with mindfulness of the body and then only later turn to mindfulness of various kinds of mental states? This is because, among other things, it's easiest to continue focus on bodily sensations. It's easier to continue a focus or to begin a focus there rather than to begin a focus on mental objects or mental processes. Why is this so? Fourth, I want to turn now to this other surprising claim that the Buddha makes in this sutta, which is in fact related to this point of why it is that we begin with the body when we're doing mindfulness meditation. In the sutta, the Buddha goes on to say, an unlearned ordinary person would be better off taking this body made up of the four elements to be their self, rather than the mind. Why is that? This body made up of the four elements is seen to last for a year, or for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, or 100 years, or even longer. So what the Buddha is saying here, and I think it comes as something of a surprise perhaps for many of us, is that if we were going to identify ourselves with something, it would make more sense to identify ourselves with our body rather than with our mind. Why is that? Because the body seems to be relatively stable over a period of months, years, even decades, while the mind, as the Buddha says, changes from morning to night all the time, every moment, we might say. Now, I don't want to make too much of the Buddha's claim here. He's clearly not saying that the body literally is our self. After all, the body is always changing subtly as well, and we've discussed that already. But nevertheless, he's saying that the body changes in a sense less often than the mind. The body appears as more permanent than the mind, if we really investigate it. And this highlights the reason why mindfulness meditation begins with mindfulness of the body and then only later turns to mindfulness of the mind and mental things. Why is that? It's because it's easier to stabilize our attention on the body, on the breathing, on, let's say, walking meditation, on the postures, rather than on mental processes. Because the body is relatively stable or involves regular kinds of change over time, such as breathing in and out, or walking one foot and then the other, left then right. There's a kind of a regularity to the change that can persist over quite a period of time. The mind, on the other hand, changes with extreme rapidity and often in seemingly random and uncontrollable ways. Again, like a monkey in the forest, grasping one branch and leaving another. Fifth, and in conclusion, the Buddha was after a better way to hold and understand the mind. What the Buddha was not trying to do, he was not trying to get us to completely stop all mental activity, nor was he trying to shame us because of our ordinary mental wanderings. Instead, he was pointing at the absurdity of taking something as chaotic and random and out of control as the monkey mind as somehow who we really are. Through practices, devoted practices such as sense restraint and concentration and mindfulness, we can try to tame this monkey mind over a period of time. What we'll end up with is a mind that is somewhat less restless, that is still active, but nevertheless more focused and more wise in what it actually attends to. So what do you do when your mind will not quiet down? The standard understanding of this in Buddhism has to do with what are known as the 5 hindrances. And I have a video on those hindrances I did a while back. I'll leave a link to it up here on the screen if you're not familiar with them or would like a refresher. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video. And meanwhile, all of you, be well.